coming out to this event. We really appreciate the support. And how phenomenal has this been? I mean, seriously. Our last speaker is Samantha Osterloff. She went from a varsity cheerleader to a heroin-addicted mother. Samantha fought over a decade through active addiction, prescription painkillers, and eventually heroin led Samantha to the brink of death and brought her to a point of degradation and willingness. With access to a full continuum of care in treatment, legal supervision, support from her family and those in long-term recovery, Samantha has been able to live a life that is truly beyond her wildest dreams. With over 6 years in active recovery, she is a member of the Lebanon County Heroin Task Force and a starting member of YPR, which is Young People in Recovery, chapter of Lancaster. Samantha successfully completed her master's degree with honors from St. Joseph University with a concentration in criminal justice and behavioral management. Samantha currently resides in Ephrata, PA, and is happily married with 2 children. Samantha is a firm believer that treatment works and recovery is absolutely possible. Samantha works for Summit BHC, and it is her life's passion to provide access treatment, break down the stigma associated with substance use disorder, and advocate for those in and out of recovery from the use of drugs and alcohol. So it is absolutely my pleasure to introduce her and love her up because she's amazing.
Everybody's taller than you.
That's right. I got my sneakers on, so I'm super short. My name's Samantha, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that means for me is that I have not had to use a mood or mind-altering substance since December 21st of 2011. And when I say thanks, my dad's here. Thanks, Dad. And when I say had to use a mood or mind-altering substance, long before I came to my point of misery enough to push me into seeking some help, I had to use. It wasn't a choice. I wasn't gonna maybe wake up and not use that day. I had to use drugs or alcohol in one form or another to be able to survive and get through my day. And I have to say that I'm truly grateful to be here today because I grew up in Lebanon County. I owe a lot to the Lebanon County Probation Department. I owe a lot to Lebanon County Crisis Intervention, Good Samaritan Hospital, and this community for helping me get access to treatment, holding me to boundaries to stay in treatment, and continue the complete continuum of care after completing inpatient treatment. And so I'm grateful to be here. My father grew up in Lebanon, and I remember it's crazy to be in Monument Park today because I used to be the person on the street, going into some of these houses in Lebanon in the city, picking up illegal substances. I remember driving out to my grandparents and seeing like the little cannonballs and stuff, and I'd never actually been in the park. So it's really beautiful for me to be here today and to have been invited to come into a group of amazing people with the Harm Reduction Committee and help plan this day. And in the beginning stages, when I was talking with this woman and she's like, we have this committee in Lebanon, do you want to be a part of it? And I said, oh my God, what's it for? And she told me kind of what their goal was to have this recovery day. And that was just about 5 or 6 months ago. And we put this thing together within that time. And so I'm grateful for that. So I grew up in Palmyra, Pennsylvania. Typically when I speak, nobody knows where that is, but because everyone here is from Lebanon County, you know where Palmyra is, right next to Hershey. You can smell the chocolate when you're going into school. And I had a really typical upbringing. There isn't anything that happened in my childhood that I would consider some extreme form of trauma or misery that led me to the use of drugs and alcohol. I have 2 great parents who, God bless their hearts, they continue to support me even when they probably should have walked away for their own good. My father, growing up, was an alcoholic, and I used that for a really long time to justify why I was the way I was. And I learned in recovery that it has nothing to do with that, and my father has abstained from the use of alcohol for almost 12 years now. Is it 12? Woo! A little over 12. And I can tell you that he's one of my greatest assets in recovery. I don't just say that because he's here. If you know me, I'm a daddy's girl. And to have someone in my life who is proud of me just because I don't pick up one day at a time and who understands this vicious disease has been such a gift. And in those younger years, I didn't think that was a gift. You know, I certainly didn't treat him well. You know, I didn't treat either of my parents very well, but I grew up in this household where my parents were physically there. They gave me everything I needed, not always everything I wanted, because I'm selfish and self-centered, like to the core, especially so when I'm not working an active program of recovery. And I had this seemingly beautiful life. I had 2 loving parents. I have an older brother and older sister who are normal. Normal in the sense that my brother can come home and have a beer and he doesn't drink an entire case, not get up for work, or wreck his car under the influence. So, you know, my brother and my sister aren't like me. And I thank God for that, because they took care of my parents for a lot of years when I wasn't there to be like a productive member of the family. And so, you know, growing up, like it said in my intro, I did great in school. I always was on the honor roll. Everything on the outside looked okay. I was a varsity cheerleader in high school. I played all kinds of sports, you know, and on the outside, if any other parent saw me, they may think, I wish my child was more like Samantha. Well, first, if you really knew me, no, you don't, because on the inside, I was dying. And I can remember my obsessive, addictive, compulsive personality as early as the age of like 6 or 7. You know, I'm obsessively collecting pogs from Sunset Market. I'm really excited that I can shout out some Lebanon County stuff and people understand. You know, like getting pogs at Sunset. I would go to Roots and I would like force my parents to spend $50 on a TY Beanie Baby because I had to have all of them or I wasn't full inside. And I had this void inside of me from as early as I can remember. As I got older, it became, you know, expensive clothing. I didn't want to go to Lebanon Mall because they didn't have an American Eagle or Hollister, and I needed to have great clothes to feel okay. And then for me, somewhere along the way, drugs came into play. And I manipulated my family. You know, I utilized the fact that, you know, my father was struggling. My mom wanted to make sure he wasn't drinking and control his drinking, and Dad didn't want her to control his drinking. And I used that as like my justification and means to do whatever I wanted, you know. So I'm out there, I'm hanging out with people a lot older than me. I'm smoking weed for the first time, and I remember that when I smoked weed for the first time, when I drank for the first time, I know that I may have not had this crazy eye-opening experience, but I know that my need and want for that substance was far greater than anyone else around me's need for that. You know, I needed to have that to feel okay. And again, I keep doing that. You know, all through high school, I smoked weed, I drank, I experimented with painkillers and every other, you know, drug that you may be able to list. And I just didn't want to feel anything. And I used those substances to make me feel like everything was okay. And I make sure everything on the outside's good, you know? So I go away to college. I pick a college because my older friends were there and I knew I could have what I wanted. And at that time, what I needed to have. And I go away to college. And around that time, my father had stopped drinking. And I would attempt to assassinate him and his character in order to continue to live the way I was living whenever anyone in my family questioned what I was doing. And you know, there were that whole first year, I mean, I can tell you that on Halloween night, my freshman year of college, I used prescription pain medication, opiate prescription pain medication in a very strong form for the first time. And the feeling I got after that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. And from then on, you know, that first night, and there's times, you know, when you go to treatment, they have you do your timeline. And now that I'm clean, I can think back to every single decision I made where I knew that if I make this next decision, it's not going to be good. You know, things aren't going to get better. They're only going to get worse. And I continued to make that decision anyway. And first it was with continuing to start using that type of opiate pain medication. And then I would continue to use, but I was still doing good in school. And I would come home on the weekends, and my parents would notice something's different, but I would continue. I'm a master manipulator when I'm out there, and I'm nasty. And it was to a point where my parents were actually afraid of me because of how awful I was to them. And I would be really nasty every time they'd ask me about something, and I would just continue to live life the way I was living. And I would say, I'll go to outpatient for a little bit, you know? I'll be okay, it's just on the weekends, I'm a college student, everything's fine. But the way I was living was by no means normal for a college student. And I went through my first and second year of college like that. And then again, you know, continuing to use every day, keeping everything okay on the outside, trying to keep up with everybody else to make no one question my behavior, because I wanted to keep doing life how I was doing it, because I was right and I knew what was best. And I can remember another point in my journey after my sophomore year, one of my really close friends took his own life. And after that happened, I knew that the way we were grieving wasn't appropriate. You know, we were just continuing to use in his memory, glorify it because he couldn't be here. You know, just very unhealthy coping mechanisms. And I knew if I continued to use after that, that I would end up like him. You know, I'd end up, you know, being in a coffin. And I continued to use anyway. Took some time off school, went back to school. But this time when I went back to school, I took my drug dealing boyfriend with me. And so I had the access to money. And at that point, I didn't have to steal my mom's jewelry. I didn't have to pawn my possessions. I didn't have to degrade myself as a woman. And not having to do all those things allowed me to justify even more the way I was living. And when I was up there, I, you know, all through my story, I do things. As further my addiction progresses, the more things I do that I promised I was never going to do. And the next thing I promised myself I was never going to do was pick up a needle. And that junior year of college, I picked up a needle. And again, before that happened, I can remember it like it was yesterday, you know, almost in like a slow motion, weird dream type of state. I have a memory that before I used the substance in that way, I knew that there was really going to be no turning back, and that my life was going to continue to get worse. And my disease, my body, my mind, and my spirit are so destroyed when I'm active in the disease that I can tell you that I did not care. And I continued to use a substance in that manner for about another year and a half. And I'm going to wrap up all the misery here soon, because really why I'm here today is to talk about my recovery, my life today, and what my resources in this community were able to do for me to stay clean and have a life that really is beautiful. And so I get really sick, and I end up in the hospital, and within a couple hours of being there, I'm on life support. And they put me on life support because my body started to shut down because I had endocarditis, which is heart failure. So I had right side heart failure, and I had blown my tricuspid valves as a result of the continued use of IV drugs. And I had a blood clot in my lung, and I was septic. I had pneumonia, and they told my family that I had a 10% chance to live. And they informed my family that they probably should have everybody come say goodbye to me because the chances of me living were slim to none, and they'd be surprised if I'd ever make a full recovery. And after that time on life support, you know, I think back today, and one of my biggest passions is working with families to kind of help them navigate through this disease. And it always keeps it really green for me when I need to remember my parents being called into that room and being told that their daughter, who at that time they were unaware I was using drugs in that manner, had been as sick as I had gotten, and that my disease was that strong. Because I can tell you now, as being a parent today, that even with my 7-year-old daughter, when someone tells me she does something wrong, I don't believe them. And no parent ever wants to sit there and say, my son or daughter, my loved one, my wife, my husband, no one, my loved one is a drug addict. And why couldn't I fix them? Because I can tell you, if you're sitting here today and you're feeling bad because you couldn't save someone in your family and you couldn't get them to stay clean and stop using one day at a time, that if the love of your family or the fear of death could push people like me into putting down the use of drugs and alcohol, we wouldn't be here today raising awareness about the disease and that recovery is possible. And my parents did everything they could. There is no guide that I'm aware of that says, okay, your daughter's on life support from using drugs, turn to page 6, and this is going to tell you A, B, and C of what to do next. And if A, B, and C don't work, then D, E, F, or just all of the above. There isn't a manual like that. And I have to remember how just terrified my parents were that day, finding out the severity of my life and what I was doing, and their feelings of inadequacy and inability to save me. And so I end up spending about 2 months in the hospital. I go to another hospital to learn how to walk again because I had been bedridden so long. My bones and my muscles were harmed by the infection. And I can tell you that this disease is so just insidious and disgusting because I was so delusional. I did not think I was an addict, and I did not think I had a problem. And I thought 110% when I ended up getting home, I wasn't going to use again. And that's not my story. You know, I go to this other rehabilitation place for 2 months to, do the cardiac rehab and all that stuff. And I go home, and I'm, just to paint the delusion for you about this disease, is that I'm home with 50% heart function. I have a pink cane. I'm 22. Okay, I can't walk up more than 1 flight of stairs at a time. And still, I did not think I had a disease. I did not think I was an addict, and I certainly wasn't willing to get help. I landed in my first treatment after that really great boyfriend, who at that time had proposed to me. It was going to be beautiful. He went to treatment, so I went. And I can tell you in that treatment center that I know that they were talking about living a new way of life. I know they were talking about all these things I needed to do, and I didn't listen. I got a boyfriend. I made some best friends, and we all signed our books together, our little NA books, and we were going to just conquer recovery together. And again, that's not part of my story. That's not what happened. I got out, and I used with every single one of them. I got arrested for the first time with one of them, and one of them was the biological father of one of my children. And, before that happened, I had tried to go back to school because my parents just wanted me to be okay. They just wanted me to succeed. That's all they wanted from me, was just to be happy and healthy. And I was not able to live that way. And I go back to school, and I just cause another disaster, They help me move up there. They help, pay for me to live there. And I'm living there with no food in my fridge, no food in my cabinets. The electric's been turned off. I have no cable because that bill I never paid. In recovery, I did pay that. I made a financial amends, and I end up living with this man who I met in that first treatment, and I end up finding out that I'm pregnant. And so I do the thing that I know best to do at that time, and I call my mom and dad. And like the amazing supportive parents they are, they come move me out and they move me home. And my parents tried everything they could to protect me. Just protect me from that relationship. And they were not able to, because this disease is more powerful than me, and it's more powerful than everybody here. It's more powerful than any human. And I can tell you and stand from the podium and tell you as a woman that I put my daughter in a lot of dangerous situations when I was pregnant. I continued to stay in a physically abusive relationship while pregnant. I continued to abuse a maintenance program while pregnant, and I did use while I was pregnant. And I will stand from the podium today and tell you that without any shame, because I will never forget the first time that I was at a meeting when I would eventually go to treatment again, and I heard a woman share at the podium about that exact thing, and I heard her say, "I'm not ashamed of it anymore, because I don't live that way anymore, and it doesn't mean I didn't love my child." And so I will never ever stand at the podium and leave that out of my story, because I know there's one person everywhere I speak, anytime I go out and share that part of my story, that is sitting in the crowd feeling like she's an awful mother because of what she had to go through just to get through another day. And that's what we do when we have the disease. We do whatever we can do to get through another day. And up until that point, before that pregnancy, I'd already been arrested. I already used the needle. I already degraded myself as a woman. I already put myself in dangerous situations. I had already allowed a lot of unhealthy people to control what I was doing, and I had backed myself into a corner. And I can tell you that God has a purpose for me, and I know that because He didn't let me die in January of 2018. 11. He didn't let me die. And he didn't let my daughter die either. And my daughter was born in September of 2011 with no signs of any of the unhealthy behavior while I was pregnant. And the delusion of my disease, again, is that I thought that I was going to have this baby and I was going to stay clean because I had a child, which also, BTW, doesn't keep you clean. Having a kid, sometimes makes it more stressful. And I really thought that my life was going to be beautiful, and it really wasn't. And, the second I got out of the hospital, I started to use again. And I can remember one weekend my mom called me. And I said, it's cool, I just do it on the weekends. Everything's fine. Please don't tell my dad. Because I didn't want my dad to find out. And what I didn't know is that she had told my father. And over the course of the next about 1-2 months, my family, my mom and dad started to go see a therapist. And they started to kind of try to get well and figure out what to do, regardless of whether or not I was ready to recover. And they started to make plans to make sure that my daughter was safe, and thank God. And on December 20th of 2011, I overdosed on my parents' couch and was woken up by a paramedic and a North Cornwall Township Police Department officer. And my mom had let him know, what I was up to, what I was doing. She let him know that I was on probation. And that man, I wasn't nice to him, but that man said to me, congratulations, your probation officer said that you can go to treatment and not jail. And I want to point that out because I do think that's a very important part of my story. I recently went back to the North Cornwall Police Department and I left that arresting officer a little bag with a note in it. And I said, thank you so much for letting me go to treatment and not putting me in jail. And thank you so much for not being nasty to me, because he was really nice to me. He didn't look at me like I was a piece of trash. He didn't look at me like he was judging me because my daughter was there. I had a baby, and that's still the behavior I was exhibiting. And he wrote me this beautiful email back, and he said, thank you so much for reaching out, because so many times we see people in your situation and we never hear from them again. We don't know if they get clean, we don't know if they go to treatment, but keep doing what you're doing because you are strong. And so I go to treatment. But before treatment, I go to crisis intervention, and they give me 2 pamphlets. And I choose the one pamphlet because the other pamphlet I'd already gone there. And I wasn't sure I wanted to relive some of those experiences that were self-made there. And so I go to this other place. And for me, I am a firm believer that treatment works regardless of where you go. If your desire to get clean and recover and remove yourself from the use of drugs and alcohol is fierce, you're going to be okay no matter where you go. But for me, what was different about this facility was that my crisis intervention worker was really hilarious, and I got to meet him too, being in the new job I'm at, and so that was really cool too. And I said, thank you for being so sarcastic and not mean, I appreciate that. And the thing that was different for me this time about that facility is I really walked into treatment an empty shell of a human. I was certainly not a woman. I was a scared, terrified little girl. I had nothing else left to give. And of course I didn't realize that when the cop told me to go to treatment, because I was like, whatever, I'm going to do outpatient. And my parents were like, no, we have boundaries now, and you're going to go to treatment, or you're going to live on the street, but you're not going to destroy this baby's life, and you're not going to destroy our life anymore. And so by the time I walked into those treatment doors, I was done. I could not even fathom using again at that point. And I had this beautiful moment. I walk in there and everybody knows my name, and at first I was like, that's weird, why do you know who I am? And everybody in that facility had known some small thing about me so that they were able to relate. And at first I thought that was weird too, but then I realized that they had a chart, so they could read something like basic information, basic demographics about me, as social, all that. But it was comforting because they didn't judge me. And the people that were working in that facility were living a life in recovery, and they were not afraid to tell me about it. I had heard people say, life beyond your wildest dreams, just do what we do and you'll get what we get. And I always thought it was stupid and it sounded silly. And for the first time, as I watched these people just come to work, be happy, and be really excited about working in a treatment center, my vision of that and my vision of what recovery could be changed. Because up until that point, I thought that every person in the world uses some type of mood or mind altering substance. And the woman I see at Redner's with 4 or 5 kids loving her life grocery shopping is definitely on something, because everybody is, because how can you get through life otherwise? And I finally started to really, in my core, start believing that I can live a life without the use of drugs or alcohol, and I can live an abstinence-based life. And I want to say, too, before I go on, is that I am a firm believer, too, that not everybody recovers in the same manner. So if you don't choose to go to a 12-step fellowship, if you choose to be on some type of medication to help you get through the day, please do so, because I'm sick of people dying. And if you can have a better quality of life with what you're doing, if faith-based is more your deal, please do it. I just don't want people to die. But for me, the way I am, I chose an abstinence route. And I stayed through treatment, and I was a lucky person to be young enough to have a really hard-working father with good insurance. And I'm blessed for that, because I had access to care that not everybody in this state or in the world gets to have. And I did 37 days of treatment. And by the time I was done with treatment, I really wanted to go to a recovery house, which is weird. And I just didn't have that option. And I returned home, and I came back to Lebanon County. And I can tell you that my desire to stay clean was way greater than my desire to use, because I lived across the street from my drug dealer. With my parents, the first 15 months I was clean. And it was like a different environment for me now. My parents wanted to know, did you make it to outpatient? Did you complete the whole day? Why did you spend money on Red Bull? I want your gas receipts. I want everything so I can clock you throughout the day, because the reality of it is, and I hear a lot of people say, well, I'm an adult. I can make my own decisions. I'm an adult. But guess what? For me, the way I was living and my inability to take opportunity and chances to get well, I relinquished my right to make adult decisions. I was not an adult, and so I was willing to abide by those rules. And that's what I did. My life was recovery. I lived at home. I went to outpatient, and then I went to meetings, and then I came home, and then I went to bed. And God bless my parents, because something that, just talking to a friend about this today, something that breaks my heart is seeing all these children that are getting into the system because their parents are not able to get clean. Maybe they don't have the access. Maybe they're unaware, for whatever reason, and these kids are ending up in the system. And my mom and dad gave me one of the greatest gifts you could ever give a mother, and they gave me the chance and the choice and the opportunity to get clean and not have to worry about my daughter's safety. And I was, not willing initially, but I became willing to sign over custody of my child to my parents, and I did that. And they continued to protect her while I had the chance to get well. And so the first 15 months I lived there. And for me, my journey in recovery and my journey living in the light and my journey of not waking up wanting to die every day started really quickly. Because the cool thing about recovery is that you can recover as fast as you want to. If you want to hang out and continue to have the old same behaviors and just not use, you can. I'm not going to tell you your life's going to get better quicker, because it probably won't. It's not my experience that it does. But I really, really wanted to get out and do this, and so I did. I did all the things they told me to do. I got a sponsor, I got a home group, and I started working the steps in a 12-step program. And I'm telling you that very quickly my life did begin to change. And I started waking up with this weird feeling of joy, which I really wasn't used to. Because I have to remind myself that I lived in misery for a lot of years. I lived in fear, I lived in anxiety, and I was so consumed by that substance. And it was a breath of fresh air when I can remember starting to wake up and being like, what am I going to do today? The possibilities are endless, And I can say that, through recovery, I've been able to mend and fix almost every single relationship in my family. My brother, who is probably one of the people in this whole world that I admire the most besides my father, he hated me. I wouldn't like me if I was him. I'm getting all this attention and doing the wrong stuff. And here he is being a productive member of society, having to like fight for affection in the family from my parents because all their energy is spent on me. And the first 9 months that I was clean, I didn't say sorry to my brother. I didn't try to say, look at what I'm doing. And I just kind of started showing up. And that's what recovery taught me. It taught me to show up, no matter what, to suit up and show up. And when my brother asked me to hang out with his kids or babysit, I did. And I took that as a blessing that he trusted me. And when he asked me to come to the little parties he'd have in his cute little neighborhood in Annville, I would come to those parties and I would show up. And guess what? I didn't get blackout drunk. I didn't show up sick. I didn't nod off in the corner and have him have to explain that I'm tired to somebody. I showed up. And when my parents asked me to do something, I showed up. And at 9 months, we went on a family vacation, and it was the first time in the years that I can remember going on a family vacation where I got up at 7 o'clock and was like, what are we going to do today? My brother's like, Samantha, why are you awake? This is weird. You know, because all I did the past couple of years before that was sleep or be miserable because I didn't have what I needed to be well. I never brought enough. And I remember taking him out on the porch and deciding that I was going to make a verbal amends to him. And my brother had a really hard time understanding recovery. He had a really hard time believing that I wasn't going to die. And there's many times that my brother reminded me that he was no longer going to associate with me because he's been preparing himself for my funeral since I was about 17. And I went on the porch with my brother and I, did the whole amends process and asked him, like, what can I do for you to give back for time I've taken, for fear I've given your children? And all he said was, I just want you to stay clean and I just want my sister back. And I'm really grateful that God's grace has continued to follow me to be able to keep that, because this is a man who didn't look me in the eye for years. Who, when I said I love you, he didn't say it back, because he was that angry. Who, one of those people that are like angry at you, so you have a conversation, but like they don't talk to you, they talk like kind of to the side of you. Like that was our relationship for a long time, and that was like heartbreaking to me. And that was one of the most beautiful things that happened in my recovery, is that me and my brother have this really cool relationship where he wants to hang out with me. And like I want to spend time with him. And my nephews, I think a lot of times when we're out there, we forget about the misery we cause other people and the harm that trickles down as a result of how we're living. And those little boys saw me on life support, and those little boys saw me scream and lose my mind when I didn't get what I want. Those little boys saw me under the influence, and I had a lot of making up to do for them. My youngest nephew was still scared of me probably till I was like almost 2 years clean. And my older nephew, who's like the sensitive one, and he's like my precious little gems. He's awesome. He